men who were born in the wrong place at the wrong time and made the darkest decision possible. They were not soldiers. They were not heroes. They were human weapons built by power, fear, and blind loyalty to organizations that defined entire eras. Their names sent chills down your spine. Their methods redefined brutality, and their stories, though uncomfortable, are part of a reality the world cannot ignore. Today we're going to talk about 8 individuals who rank among the most feared hitmen in the history of organized crime. From the alleys of Medellin to the Sicilian highways, from the neighborhoods of New Jersey to the luxury of Los Cabos. 8 stories that share one thing in common. They all ended badly. Stay until the end, because the last hitman on this list did something so brutal, so calculated, that the very mobsters who knew him said he was unlike any human being they had ever encountered. Brace yourself. This is not fiction. Elchino Antrax, the influencer hitman, José Rodrigo Aréchiga Gamboa, born on June 15, 1980 in Culiacán, Sinaloa. A name that took a while to surface in police files, but when it did, it shook Mexico in a way nobody expected, not just because of his brutality, but because of his audacity. Elchino Antrax was not your typical gunman from the narco stories. He was, in many ways, the first hitman of the digital age. While he coordinated elimination operations and controlled entire territories for the Sinaloa cartel, he was uploading photos to Instagram posing with luxury weapons, surrounded by models wearing watches worth more than an average family sees in years. It was the flaunting of criminal power turned into social media content. And that, paradoxically, is what made him famous, and what gave him away. His beginnings in organized crime were not spectacular. At age 24 in 2004, he joined the ranks of the Sinaloa cartel, not as an enforcer, but as a bodyguard for Vicente Zambada Niebla, known as El Vicentillo, the son of leader Ismael El Mayo Zambada. He grew within the organization, learning its rules, earning the trust of the most powerful men in Mexico. His nickname was no coincidence. According to accounts circulating within the criminal world, it was Aréchiga himself who described himself as the anthrax virus. Once you come into contact with the bacteria, you're practically dead. That phrase defines him better than any police record ever could. In 2008, 2 events transformed his career. First, the capture of Vicente Zambada. Second, the split between the Sinaloa cartel and the Beltran Leyva brothers, which unleashed a brutal internal war. In that power vacuum, Elchino Antrax took command of Los Ántrax, the armed wing of the cartel that reported directly to El Mayo Zambada, from bodyguard to head enforcer, in 4 years, without hesitation. Under his leadership, Los Ántrax expanded their presence across Sinaloa, Sonora, Durango, Chihuahua, and Nuevo León. In 2013, they received a specific mission: prevent the Zetas cartel from entering Sinaloa territory. One more war, in a country that was already used to counting them. The group operated with a clear method: eliminate rivals, display the results, and terrorize the territory. Their documented operational methods include public bridge displays. Elchino Antrax was known for ordering that the bodies of eliminated rivals be hung from bridges in Culiacán and neighboring cities to send messages of territorial dominance. In a single weekend linked to Los Ántrax operations, the state of Sinaloa recorded at least 20 violent incidents, including 3 bodies hung from a bridge in Guamuchil and 8 people taken out inside a volleyball court in Culiacán. What set Elchino Antrax apart from any other hitman of his generation was his relationship with fame. While his contemporaries sought anonymity to survive, he sought the spotlight. His Instagram posts became legendary. Private jets, yachts, parties in Los Cabos, high-caliber weapons displayed like trophies, female company that any Hollywood star would have envied. He was the narco-influencer before that term even existed. Interpol had him in their sights. Mexican and American agencies were monitoring him, but he kept posting, as if the rules didn't apply to him, as if the law was something that happened to other people. In December 2013, while arriving in the Netherlands on a flight from Amsterdam under a false name, Norberto Siqueiros Garcia, he was detained by Interpol. The man who flaunted his criminal life on social media tried to cross an international border with a forged passport. His audacity had a limit. Transferred to the United States, he pleaded guilty in May 2015 before a federal court. He admitted to having coordinated the transport of tons of illegal merchandise, white substance and green substance, into American territory, and to having participated in acts of violence connected to the organization. He was sentenced to 87 months in prison but was granted house arrest, a sentence many considered outrageously lenient. In 2020, Elchino Antrax fled. He returned to Mexico, to his territory, to the world he knew. 10 days later, on May 15, 2020, he was found dead in Culiacán. The details of the settling of scores were never fully clarified. In the world of organized crime, those who betray or become a problem don't last long. The anthrax virus in the end found its antidote, El Macho Prito, the fearless gunman. If Elchino Antrax was the hitman of social media, Gonzalo Inzunza, known as El Macho Prito, was the complete opposite, a man of shadows, of direct action, of pulling the trigger without hesitation. An old-school gunman in a world that was starting to change. Mexican and American authorities formally attributed close to 80 violent incidents to him, and in 2011 the United States government placed him on an official list of the most dangerous criminals in North America. He was born in Culiacán and lived in Colonia Morelos, one of the neighborhoods forged in the harshness of Sinaloa. He was known for his dark complexion, hence his nickname, and for something that state and federal authorities documented with alarm: the weaponry he used. We're not talking about ordinary handguns, we're talking about Barrett .50 caliber rifles capable of piercing armored vehicles. Grenades, rocket launchers, he was a man of war in the most literal sense of the term. His position within the Sinaloa cartel was unambiguous, head enforcer reporting directly to Ismael El Mayo Zambada. That placed him at the operational peak of the armed apparatus of one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the world. And El Macho Prito was not an administrator. He was an executor of orders. In April 2008, alongside Manuel Torres Felix, he unleashed what the Mexican press would call the narco war between the Sinaloa cartel and the Beltran Leyva brothers. When the alliance between both organizations broke apart, Inzunza was one of the men who lit the fuse. The rupture was devastating. The consequences, measured in bodies, surpassed any previous estimate: the parking lot incident. On May 8, 2008, in the parking lot of a shopping center in Culiacán, a squad under his orders took out 3 young men: Edgar Guzman Lopez, 22 years old and son of El Chapo Guzman; Cesar Ariel Loera Guzman; and Arturo Meza Cáceres, son of the businesswoman known as La Emperatriz. During the attack, at least 500 rounds from AK-47s were fired, and a rocket launcher struck the wall of a nearby business, causing massive panic. According to the federal prosecutor's report, the operation was coordinated by a cell under the direct command of El Macho Prito. Whether it was a case of mistaken identity in the darkness or a calculated move within the internal war was never fully clarified. In that world, that kind of mistake has no possible correction. In 2010, he was sent to Mexicali as the new head of Sinaloa cartel cells in Baja California and Sonora. From there, he controlled the flow of illegal merchandise into the United States, one of the most lucrative corridors in the criminal business across all of North America. On December 12, 2013, in Puerto Peñasco, Sonora, El Macho Prito's luck ran out. Federal forces were manning a checkpoint on the federal highway when the confrontation erupted. Gonzalo Inzunza went down. He did not surrender. He did not escape. He did not negotiate. He died the way he lived, with a weapon in his hand and without taking a single step back. He had alternate aliases, LMP, El Once, but they all pointed to the same man. A gunman who turned fear into his primary tool of power, and who ended up being eliminated by the only force he could neither buy nor intimidate: time and the bullets of the state. L.A. Barbie, the American who wanted to be a narco. The history of Mexican organized crime has few characters as paradoxical as Edgar Valdez Villarreal, an American born in Laredo, Texas in 1973 of Mexican descent who crossed the border to become one of the most wanted criminals in Mexico. Mexican agents nicknamed him La Barbie because of his fair skin, light eyes, and appearance, closer to a college quarterback than a criminal, which stood in stark contrast to the typical profile of a cartel boss. But behind that appearance was a man capable of a level of violence that surpassed many of his Mexican counterparts. And in the world of organized crime, that is saying a lot. His first steps in the criminal world were not in Mexico. He started distributing green substance in Laredo in the early 2000s and expanded his operations toward New Orleans and Memphis. But the American market was too small for him. His ambition drove him to cross the border and align himself with the Beltran Leyva cartel, where he rose at a speed that stunned even his own associates. Through this alliance, he managed to consolidate a distribution network for white substance spanning Colombia, Mexico, and the United States. According to American authorities, he moved as much as 600 kilograms of white substance per week into U.S. territory, using speedboats, aircraft, and even tractor-trailers. He was also part of the Sinaloa cartel during a period of strategic alliance. The names he shared a structure with read like a who's who of organized crime in the 2000s. Joaquin Guzman Loera, Ismael Zambada Garcia, Heriberto Lascano, Miguel Ángel Treviño Morales. He was the first to record on video the violent interrogation sessions and the elimination of his rivals and send them to media outlets. In December 2005, a video sent to the American newspaper the Dallas Morning News showed 4 alleged members of the Gulf Cartel being subjected to harsh interrogation, confessing to crimes on camera. One of them was taken out in the video. The Attorney General's office confirmed that Valdez Villarreal was behind the footage, a practice that later became the standard of terror across organized crime in all of Mexico. Between 2003 and 2008, La Barbie and La Federación recruited and trained members of the Mara Salvatrucha from El Salvador for operations in Mexico. The result was the appearance of scenes of violence that had never been seen before, bodies eliminated in brutal fashion, dismembered, and displayed in public squares. La Barbie imported a model of intimidation-based violence that redefined the standards of organized crime. What was not public for years, and what official documents would later confirm, is that La Barbie was leading a double life that surpassed any fiction. While moving tons of white substance and financing private armies of hitmen, he was also a DEA informant. He helped American authorities capture several cartel members, including, in the most supreme act of betrayal, his own former boss and friend, Arturo Beltran Leyva. In the world of organized crime, this has a name: delayed suicide. Except La Barbie knew exactly when he was going to fall and calculated his exit strategy with precision. In August 2010, Valdez Villarreal was captured in Mexico. In 2015, he was extradited to the United States, where he pleaded guilty to 4 counts of trafficking illegal substances and 1 count of money laundering. In 2018, he was sentenced to 49 years in prison, avoiding life imprisonment thanks to his cooperation with prosecutors. But his story did not end with the sentence. Valdez Villarreal became a key witness in the case against Mexico's former Secretary of Public Security, Genaro Garcia Luna, accused of receiving millions in bribes from the cartels. The American who wanted to be a narco ended up being the piece that helped reveal corruption at the highest levels of the Mexican government. And in 2022, he vanished from the American prison system without official explanation. His whereabouts, as of February 2026, remain an unsolved mystery. Popeye, the right hand of the boss. There are hitmen. And then there is Jhon Jairo Velásquez, born on April 15, 1962 in Yarumal, Antioquia, Colombia. The man who went by the alias Popeye was, for more than a decade, the principal enforcer, the trusted confidant, and the most active armed operative of Pablo Escobar and the Medellin cartel. His own words, spoken in multiple interviews with media from around the world, are the measure of what he was capable of. 250 direct killings, and more than 3,000 coordinated. This is not a figure pulled from classified files. It is a voluntary confession, delivered with a coldness that chilled the blood of everyone who interviewed him. Popeye was not just a gunman. He was a military operator within the structure of the Medellin cartel. His hands were behind some of the most notorious acts of violence in the history of Colombia. The killing of Luis Carlos Galán, presidential candidate and declared enemy of the illegal substance trade, in August 1989. The attack on Avianca Flight 203 brought down mid-flight in November 1989, with the failed objective of eliminating presidential candidate César Gaviria. 107 innocent people lost their lives. The attack on the DAS building, Administrative Department of Security in Bogotá in December 1989, which left approximately 70 dead and more than 500 wounded. These were not spontaneous crimes. They were military-style operations carried out with planning, resources, and a coldness that left investigators speechless. Popeye coordinated men, financed operations, and carried out direct orders from the boss. In 1992, following Escobar's death the following year, Popeye was captured. He spent 23 years and 3 months in high-security Colombian prisons. He was released in 2014 and reinvented himself in a way that sparked enormous debate. He started a YouTube channel where he told stories about the Medellin cartel, answered questions from followers, and presented himself as someone who had found redemption. He amassed hundreds of thousands of subscribers. For some, he was an instrument of transitional justice, a voice exposing the machinery of the criminal world from the inside. For others, it was the glorification of crime packaged in a digital format. The debate was never resolved. In 2018, he was recaptured for extortion and criminal conspiracy linked to active criminal groups in Medellin. The man who said he had changed had not fully changed. He died on February 6, 2020 at the National Cancer Institute in Bogotá, defeated by esophageal cancer. The last man of Escobar left this world alone, in a hospital bed surrounded by the shadow of everything he had done. Pinina, the most dangerous hitman nobody knows. If Popeye was the public face of Escobar's armed apparatus, Jhon Jairo Arias Tascon, known as Pinina, was its backbone. Born in 1961, raised in the La Vaina neighborhood of Medellin, he stood barely 5 feet tall. His appearance was so unthreatening that Escobar affectionately called him El Monito, the little blonde one. But behind that affectionate nickname lived the man whom the boss himself considered his most effective enforcer, his war chief, his most reliable weapon. Pinina is not as well known as Popeye. He never gave interviews. He never had a YouTube channel. He died before the digital world even existed. And that very invisibility is precisely what makes him the most dangerous hitman that nobody talks about enough. The story of how Pinina entered the Medellin cartel is so cinematic it's hard to believe. As a teenager, he stole the stereo from a vehicle parked near the San Pedro Cemetery in Medellin. The owner of the vehicle, it turned out, was a man connected to Pablo Escobar. In the logic of the criminal world, stealing from someone in Escobar's circle was the equivalent of signing your own death warrant. But something happened in that encounter. The skinny young man from La Vaina, instead of begging, kept his composure. He showed something that Escobar valued above all else: ice-cold nerve. And instead of being eliminated, he was recruited. That theft was Pinina's passport to the 5th position in the hierarchy of the Medellin cartel. Pinina did not just carry out orders. He planned. He was the leader of a hitman cell known as Los Priscos, and he possessed 3 qualities that made him unique among Escobar's men: strategic intelligence, absolute emotional control, and unbreakable loyalty. His involvement in the most violent acts of the cartel is well documented. He organized and financed the killing of Justice Minister Rodrigo Lara Bonilla in 1984, the first symbolic blow by organized crime against the Colombian government. He was behind the killing of the editor of the newspaper El Espectador, Guillermo Cano, in 1986. He participated in the attack on the DAS building in 1989, which left 52 dead and more than 600 wounded. He has also attributed a role in the planning of the attack on Avianca Flight 203, where 110 people lost their lives. When Escobar was at war with the Colombian state, it was Pinina who coordinated the armed front. He was the general without a uniform of an organization that had declared war on an entire country. In May 1990, Escobar himself warned Pinina that he needed to change cities immediately. Someone close to him had sold him out to the national police. The information had reached the search block, the special unit created specifically to dismantle the Medellin cartel. Pinina did not make it in time. On June 13, 1990, he was taken out in a police operation in Medellin. He was 28 or 29 years old. His elimination was considered by many analysts as a blow to the cartel, as significant as if Escobar himself had fallen. His position was filled by men like Tyson and Popeye himself, but nobody truly replaced Pinina. Some war leaders are irreplaceable, and his story, buried under decades of narratives about Escobar, deserves to be told. Sammy the Bull, the betrayal that brought down the mob, New York, the Gambino family, the American Cosa Nostra at the height of its power. And at the center of all that power, a man nicknamed the Bull, Salvatore Sammy Gravano, born in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn in 1945. Sammy Gravano is, without question, one of the most complex figures in 20th century organized crime. Not because he was the most violent, though he confessed to 19 killings, but because his decision to break the most sacred code of silence in the mob, the omertà, changed the history of the American underworld forever. His beginnings were like those of any young man from the Italian-American neighborhoods of Brooklyn in the 1960s. Street gangs, turf fights, petty crimes. But Gravano had something that set him apart. Strategic vision and the ability to act with absolute coldness under the highest pressure. Those qualities led him to rise within the Gambino family until he became underboss, number 2 in the organization, under the direct orders of Jhon Gotti, known as the Teflon Don, for his ability to escape every legal charge thrown at him. In December 1985, an operation that changed the course of the American mob took shape. Paul Castellano, the then boss of the Gambino family, was taken out in front of Sparks Steakhouse in Manhattan. The hit was planned with surgical precision, and Gravano was a key piece of that conspiracy. The elimination of Castellano cleared the way for Gotti to take control of the family, and Sammy the Bull, as underboss, was the man who kept the machinery running behind the throne. He coordinated operations, managed internal conflicts, ordered hits. He was, in every practical sense, the man who held together the most powerful organization in America. In the early 1990s, the FBI had managed to plant listening devices in Jhon Gotti's office. The recordings were devastating. And on those tapes, Gotti himself, the man Gravano had served with absolute loyalty, mentioned him in a dismissive way, shifting blame onto him and undermining his position within the family. When the FBI presented those recordings to Gravano as part of their pressure strategy, the effect was immediate. Sammy the Bull decided to become a cooperating government witness. His testimony in 1992 was historic. He took the stand and confirmed Gotti's position within the Gambino family, detailed the conspiracy to eliminate Castellano, and confessed to 19 killings of his own. He implicated Gotti in 4 of them. Defense attorneys tried to discredit him without success. Jhon Gotti was sentenced to life in prison. The Teflon Don fell thanks to the words of the man he trusted most. The government offered Gravano the Witness Protection Program, a new identity, a new life. It seemed like the end of a story. But Sammy the Bull did not know how to live any other way. In Arizona, under his new identity, Gravano set up a lucrative distribution network for ecstasy. His son Gerard partnered with a 23-year-old leader of a gang called the Devil Dogs. They sold more than 30,000 pills and brought in approximately $500,000 per week. In February 2000, the operation was busted. Gravano, his wife Deborah, and nearly 40 other people were arrested. The man who brought down Gotti ended up being brought down by himself. The mob, in the end, did not need to avenge the betrayal. Sammy the Bull took care of that on his own. The Iceman, the man who felt nothing. If there is a human definition of the total absence of empathy, that definition has a name: Richard Leonard Kuklinski, born on April 11, 1935 in Jersey City, New Jersey. Nicknamed the Iceman, a title earned not through metaphor but through method. He froze the bodies of his victims to confuse forensic investigators about the time of death. Kuklinski was not an official member of any mob family. He was a contractor, a freelance enforcer who worked for decades for the most powerful families in New York and New Jersey, including the Gambino family, the De Cavalcante family, and other organized crime outfits. And throughout all that time, he lived a double life so perfect that his wife and children never suspected a thing. He committed his first act of lethal violence at the age of 14. It was not premeditated in the classic sense. It was an explosion of violence born from a brutally traumatic childhood. His father beat him systematically, going so far as to take the life of one of his brothers. That channeled itself outward with irreversible consequences. What could have been an isolated episode became a pattern. Kuklinski began to feel that violence was his natural language, his tool of power in a world that had always treated him with brutality. At one point in my life, I was taking people out for nothing. Just because someone looked at me the wrong way, I'd eliminate them, stab them, shoot them, he would confess decades later. Through connections in the underworld of New Jersey, Kuklinski rose as a hitman for hire. His methods were brutally varied: firearms, ligatures, knives, cyanide. He had an almost clinical ability to adapt the method to the situation. He had no emotional preference for any of them. They were all equally indifferent to him. His victims included gambling debtors, internal mob rivals, and higher-profile targets. He is attributed to have worked for Roy DeMeo, his direct superior within the Gambino structure, and it is claimed that he participated in operations involving figures like Paul Castellano and Carmine Galante. One of the most striking accounts links Kuklinski to John Gotti. According to his own statement, Gotti hired him to take out a neighbor who had accidentally run over and caused the death of his 12-year-old son. If the account is true, it perfectly illustrates the type of services Kuklinski provided. Hits that the mob could not directly link to its own structure. He is also attributed a role in the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa, the famous union leader whose whereabouts were never confirmed. The method that gave him his nickname was simple but effective. He froze the bodies of his victims for months and then deposited them in public locations. Forensic investigators, upon analyzing the state of the remains, miscalculated the date of death, making it impossible to establish an alibi. It was a trick of forensic precision that proved effective for years. His downfall came when Detective Pat Kane of the New Jersey State Police connected him to a series of robberies, and the trail led to 5 unsolved cases of lethal violence. An undercover agent, Dominic Polifrone, was infiltrated and gained Kuklinski's trust by pretending to want to hire him for a new job. Every conversation was recorded. In December 1986, he was arrested. In 1988, a court sentenced him to 2 consecutive life sentences. He could only be eligible for release at the age of 110. Kuklinski would later confess to having eliminated more than 100 people, though unverified estimates go as high as 200 or more. He died on March 5, 2006 in a prison in Trenton, New Jersey. Until the very end, he maintained that characteristic coldness. The Iceman left this world frozen. The wild boar, the beast of the Cosa Nostra. And to understand Giovanni Brusca, you first have to understand what the Sicilian Cosa Nostra was in the 1980s and 1990s. An organization capable of openly defying the Italian state, of taking out magistrates, of blowing up highways with 500 kilograms of explosives. And Brusca was not merely a member of that organization. He was its most terrible weapon. Born on February 20, 1957 in San Giuseppe Giotto, Sicily, Giovanni Brusca accumulated over the course of his criminal career a number of killings that defies comprehension. He confessed to having eliminated more than 150 people. His nicknames say it all: Scana Cristiani, the Christian slayer; Uveru, the pig in Sicilian dialect; Il Cinghiale, the wild boar. 3 names. 3 ways of describing the same thing. Something with no compassion, that strikes without warning, and that destroys everything in its path. Brusca did not arrive at the Cosa Nostra by accident or out of economic necessity. He was born into it. His father, Bernardo Brusca, was already a respected man within the organization, later convicted in the famous Maxi trial led by Judge Giovanni Falcone. Growing up in that family meant breathing in the codes, the hierarchies, and the methods of the mob from childhood. When the time came, Giovanni Brusca did not have to choose. He simply continued the legacy, but he escalated it to a level that not even his own father could have imagined. He became the boss of the San Giuseppe Giotto Mafia family and one of the men in the innermost circle of Salvatore Toto Riina, the capo di tutti capi, the supreme boss of the Cosa Nostra during its most violent era. Brusca was part of a squad of enforcers that reported directly to Riina. In that circle, loyalty was measured in actions, not words, and Brusca proved his in the most brutal way possible. This is the date that defines Giovanni Brusca, the one that turns him into something more than a killer, a symbol of organized crime's ability to strike directly at the heart of the state. Judge Giovanni Falcone was the most important anti-mafia magistrate in Italy. He had built the Maxi trial that convicted hundreds of mobsters, including Brusca's father. He was the man who had dealt the hardest blows to the Cosa Nostra in its entire history. And the organization decided he had to be eliminated in the most devastating way possible. The operation was meticulous in its planning. 500 kilograms of explosives were placed beneath the highway connecting the Palermo airport to the Sicilian capital. On May 23, 1992, when the convoy of armored vehicles carrying Falcone approached the area of Capaci, Brusca pressed the detonator. The explosion was catastrophic. Judge Falcone, his wife Francesca Morvillo, also a magistrate, and 3 escort agents lost their lives. All of Italy came to a standstill. The attack was so devastating that it changed public perception of the mob and triggered a state response that accelerated the dismantling of the Cosa Nostra's leadership. Brusca confessed to everything. He was the one who pressed the detonator. He declared it before the judges without hesitation. Among the acts attributed to Brusca, one in particular sends a chill that transcends criminal logic. In 1996, he ordered the elimination of the son of a justice collaborator, Giuseppe Di Matteo, who was 11 years old when he was kidnapped in 1993. The boy was held for nearly 3 years before his life was taken. The purpose was to pressure the father into withdrawing his statements before the court. This act, perhaps more than any other, defines the moral dimension, or the absence of it, that characterized Brusca. On May 20, 1996, exactly 4 years after the Capaci attack, Giovanni Brusca was arrested in Sicily. He was 39 years old, and he made a decision that in the world of the Cosa Nostra was equivalent to a death sentence. He became a pentito, a justice collaborator. His statements were instrumental in multiple trials, including investigations into the connections between the Italian state and the mob, one of the darkest and most controversial chapters in Italy's recent history.